The first time I saw the eBay listing, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my phone on the kitchen tile and cracked the screen protector straight down the middle. There it was, photographed on a wrinkled paper towel under bad fluorescent light, my grandmother's wedding ring, the one she had smuggled out of Eastern Europe in the lining of her coat in 1947, the one she had pressed into my palm on her deathbed and told me in her broken English, "This is not just gold, Odessa. This is everything I could not say to you. Keep it safe." The listing title read, "Vintage costume ring, estate sale find, fake glass stone, no reserve." The starting bid was $20. It had already sold. Buy it now. $500 gone to someone whose eBay username was a string of numbers and the word Royal Collections. My name is Odessa Calloway Reyes. I am 44 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in early spring, I believed I understood exactly who was in my family and exactly how much they respected me. I was wrong on both counts, and it took a stranger on the other side of an ocean to show me the truth. I want to walk you through this from the very beginning, because the ending, I promise you, is not the ending you expect from a story like this. There is no clean, satisfying revenge here. There is something better, something harder to build and much more valuable once you have it. But we have to earn our way there together, so let me start where it started, in my own kitchen, on an ordinary Tuesday that stopped being ordinary the second I saw that photograph. My grandmother's name was Ilinka. She was born in a small town outside Brasov in Romania, back when the world was still catching its breath from one war and holding it for the next. She rarely spoke about her early life, and when she did, it came out in fragments, like she was handing you shards of glass and trusting you not to cut yourself. She told me once that she had worked as a lady's companion for a noble family whose name she never said out loud, not even to my mother. She told me that, when the political situation turned dangerous for families like the one she served, she was given very little time to decide what to do with her life, and that the ring on her finger, the one she wore every single day until the day she died, had been a parting gift from the lady she served, pressed into her hand the night before that family fled the country and disappeared into history. I grew up hearing this story as a kind of family legend, the way every family has one relative whose past sounds a little too dramatic to be entirely true. My mother believed it. My father, who married into the family, used to tease that Grandma should have been a novelist. I believed it too, mostly, but I also assumed that whatever value the ring had once carried had been diluted by decades of retelling, that the stone was probably a nice old cut of glass or a low-grade sapphire, sentimental but not significant. Grandma Ilinka passed away when I was 26, and she left me the ring specifically, skipping over my two cousins, because she said I was the one who listened when she talked, the one who did not roll her eyes. I wore that ring on a thin gold chain around my neck for years, and later, after I married my husband Desmond Reyes, I started keeping it in a small velvet box in my jewelry drawer, taking it out only for special occasions, or sometimes just to hold it and think about her. Desmond and I had been married for 11 years by the time this all happened. We met in our early 30s, both of us already a little bruised by life, both of us grateful to have found something steady. He worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. I ran a small accounting practice out of a converted office above a bakery downtown. And together, we had built a quiet, comfortable life in a modest brick house with a garden I was slowly learning to keep alive. We did not have children, by choice, and in some ways that made the family we did have, his family, feel even more central to our lives, because they were the people who filled our holidays and our Sunday dinners. Desmond's mother, Loretta Reyes, was a formidable woman, the kind of mother-in-law who has an opinion about everything from your grocery choices to the placement of your throw pillows, but who also shows up with soup the moment you sneeze. I had learned to navigate her over the years, mostly by choosing my battles carefully and letting the small things go. Desmond's younger sister, Vivienne, was a different story entirely. Vivienne was 36, unmarried, and had spent most of her adult life bouncing between jobs in retail management and multi-level marketing schemes, always one big opportunity away from finally getting ahead, according to her. She had a taste for expensive things and a chronic shortage of the money required to pay for them, and over the years she had developed a habit of viewing anything nice that belonged to someone else as something that was being unfairly withheld from her. She was not cruel in an obvious way. She was the kind of difficult that hides behind jokes and compliments, the kind that leaves you feeling slightly worse after every conversation without being able to point to exactly what was said. The two of us had never been close, but we had settled into a kind of wary politeness over the years, the sort of relationship where you smile at family dinners and privately keep your guard up. In early spring, Desmond and I decided to have our kitchen and part of our living room renovated, and during the 3 weeks of dust and construction crews, we needed somewhere to store our valuables away from the open walls and the strangers walking through our house every day. Loretta offered her guest room, and against my better instincts, I agreed, mostly because Desmond assured me his mother's house was the safest place he could think of. I packed up my jewelry, our important documents, and a few sentimental items, including my grandmother's ring, into a locked case, and I drove it over myself. What none of us accounted for was that Vivienne had been staying with her mother for the past 2 months, ever since her lease fell through, and that Vivienne, during a particularly rough patch financially, had gone looking through the guest room for something to sell. I found out about the ring almost by accident. I had gone to my in-laws' house to retrieve our things once the renovation was finished, and while unpacking the case at home, I noticed the small velvet box was missing. At first I assumed I had simply misplaced it during the move, so I tore my house apart looking, and when that turned up nothing, I called Loretta, my voice tight with the specific kind of panic that comes from losing something that cannot be replaced with money. Loretta was defensive from the first sentence, which should have told me everything, but I was too focused on finding the ring to notice the warning signs. She insisted nothing had been touched in the guest room, that I must have left it somewhere else, that I was overreacting. It was only when I asked to come over and look through the room myself that she went quiet, and in that silence I heard something shift. When I arrived, Vivienne was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, unusually casual for someone whose mother had just told her, in a tense hallway whisper I was not meant to overhear, that I was on my way. I asked her directly if she had seen a small velvet ring box among my things. She shrugged and said she vaguely remembered clearing out some old costume jewelry from the guest room a few weeks back, because she assumed it was junk left behind by a previous tenant of theirs, some long-forgotten storage box that had been sitting in that closet for years. She said she had sold a handful of pieces on eBay to make a little extra cash, since she had been between jobs, and that she was sure none of it was anything important. My stomach dropped in a way I can still feel if I think about it too long. I asked her, very carefully, very calmly, to show me exactly what she had sold. She pulled up her eBay seller account on her phone, and there, in a list of a dozen or so items, was my grandmother's ring, photographed on that same wrinkled paper towel, described as vintage costume ring, estate sale find, fake glass stone. Sold, $500. Buyer, a username that read Royal Collections 22. I asked her how she could possibly think that ring was costume jewelry when it had clearly been sitting in a labeled, locked case that belonged to me, not some forgotten box from a previous tenant. Vivienne's explanation shifted almost immediately, the story bending under the weight of my questions. She admitted, reluctantly, that she had actually gone looking through my case specifically because she needed money, and she assumed I would not mind if she borrowed a piece or two to sell, since I probably had, in her words, way more jewelry than I could ever wear anyway. She said she genuinely believed the ring was not valuable, that the stone looked cloudy and old and cheap to her untrained eye, and that she planned to tell me eventually, once she had the money to buy it back if it turned out to matter to me. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. I was not just angry. I was heartbroken in a way that surprised me with its intensity. That ring was the last physical piece of my grandmother's voice I had left, the closest thing to holding her hand one more time, and it had been taken without asking, judged as worthless by someone who never once considered that it might mean something, and sold for the price of a nice dinner out. Loretta, instead of holding her daughter accountable, immediately began softening the situation, the way she always did when Vivienne was in trouble. She reminded me that Vivienne had been under a lot of stress lately, that she surely did not mean any harm, that it was, after all, just a ring, and that I still had plenty of other jewelry to enjoy. She suggested I let it go for the sake of family peace. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw anything, though I wanted to. I simply told them both that this was not just a ring, that it belonged to my grandmother, that it had survived a war and an ocean and decades of my family's history, and that I intended to find out exactly who had bought it and get it back, whatever that took. Desmond, when I called him from the car outside his mother's house, was quiet for a long moment before he said the words that, looking back, marked the beginning of everything changing between us. He said, "I'll fix this, Odessa. I promise you I will fix this." I did not yet know how much that promise would be tested or how far he would have to go to keep it. The username Royal Collections 22 led nowhere at first. eBay does not simply hand over a buyer's real identity, and Vivienne, when pressed, claimed she had deleted the messaging thread and could not remember any additional details beyond the shipping address the payment had gone to. I spent that first night awake at my kitchen table with my laptop open, trying every combination of search terms I could think of, feeling increasingly like I was chasing a ghost. The breakthrough came 2 days later, almost by accident. I discovered that the account, though private, had left a public feedback comment on a completely different listing months earlier, a comment that included the phrase, "Always a pleasure sourcing pieces for our clients." That single phrase changed everything. I searched it directly, in quotes, and found it repeated nearly word for word on a small, elegant website belonging to a jewelry authentication and sourcing firm based in Geneva, Switzerland. A firm whose About page described their specialty as locating, authenticating, and restoring historically significant jewelry for private collectors, and in a discreet phrase near the bottom of the page, select royal households across Europe. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything else. Part of me assumed this was simply a coincidence of language, that I was letting grief and desperation lead me toward a fantasy. But I had come too far to stop looking, so I sent a carefully worded email to the general contact address of the firm, explaining that I believed a piece of jewelry with significant personal and family history had recently been purchased through an eBay account potentially connected to their organization, and that I was hoping to speak with whoever had made that purchase, purely to understand what they had bought and why. I did not expect a response. I certainly did not expect one within 18 hours, from a man named Anton Verhoeven, who identified himself as a senior gemologist and provenance researcher for the firm. His email was polite, careful, and immediately made the hair on my arms stand up, because he asked if I would be willing to send photographs of the ring before it had been sold, along with any documentation or family history I had about its origin. I sent him everything I had, old photographs of my grandmother wearing the ring throughout the decades, a short recorded voice memo I had made years earlier of her telling the story of the noble family she had served, in her own accented English, describing the way the ring had been pressed into her hand the night before a hurried departure. I did not expect this fragment of family folklore to matter to anyone but me. Anton's response, when it came 2 days later, changed the entire trajectory of this story. He explained, gently but precisely, that the ring Vivienne had listed as costume jewelry with a fake glass stone was, in fact, an early 20th century piece featuring a rare and exceptionally well-preserved rose-cut diamond, set in a distinctive style of gold work traceable to a specific court jeweler who had served several noble and royal households across Central and Eastern Europe before the upheavals of the mid-20th century scattered those families and their possessions across the world. He explained that his firm had, for the past several years, been quietly working on behalf of a European royal family attempting to locate pieces from their pre-war jewelry collection. Items that had been given away, hidden, or smuggled out during their displacement, many of which had simply vanished from historical record, presumed lost or destroyed. He told me, with what I could feel was genuine excitement even through the formal language of the email, that the design, the maker's mark faintly visible on the inside of the band, and the specific cut and setting of the stone matched almost exactly the description of a ring known from old family photographs and a handwritten invent. Ori list preserved by the royal family in question, a ring that had been given as a personal gift of gratitude to a young companion who had served the family loyally in their final months in the country before their forced departure. That companion, he believed, based on the timeline, the location, and the story I had shared, may very well have been my grandmother, Ilinka. I remember reading that email standing up in my kitchen, one hand braced against the counter, because my legs genuinely felt unsteady beneath me. I called Desmond into the room and read it out loud to him, and neither of us said anything for a long moment after I finished. It felt too large to be real, the kind of thing that happens in movies, not in the life of an accountant in a modest brick house with a garden she was still learning to keep alive. Anton explained that his firm was prepared to have the ring formally authenticated, and if confirmed, they intended to return it to the royal family as part of their ongoing effort to recover lost pieces of the collection, though they were also, he noted carefully, deeply interested in properly compensating whoever the rightful current owner was, given the highly unusual circumstances of how the ring had been sold, and given that its true value, once authenticated, would likely be assessed in the range of $250,000 or more, depending on the final provenance report. I want to pause here and tell you honestly that my first instinct, when I understood the scale of what had happened, was not really about the money, though I would be lying if I said the number did not stun me. My first instinct was a kind of grief-laced anger on behalf of my grandmother, a woman who had survived unimaginable upheaval and carried this single object across an ocean and through decades of quiet dignity, only to have her own great niece by marriage glance at it under bad kitchen lighting and decide it was worthless, worth less than a nice dinner out, worth selling to a stranger without a second thought. I called a family meeting, not a casual dinner, not a passive-aggressive text thread, but an actual sit-down, at our house this time, on my terms. Desmond agreed immediately, though I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was already bracing himself to be caught between the two women who mattered most to him. Loretta arrived first, already talking before she was through the door, rehearsing what I now recognize as a defense she had clearly practiced, about how young people make mistakes, about how Vivienne had always struggled more than Desmond had growing up, about how family should forgive family. Vivienne arrived 15 minutes later, arms crossed, jaw set, the posture of someone who has decided in advance that she is the one being wronged here. I did not raise my voice. I had promised myself that, sitting alone the night before, because I knew that whatever happened in this conversation would shape the rest of my relationship with this family, and I did not want it shaped by rage, even justified rage. I laid out everything calmly. I told them about Anton, about the firm in Geneva, about the maker's mark and the handwritten inventory and the photographs that matched. I told them what the ring was actually worth, and I watched Vivienne's face go through several stages of disbelief, embarrassment, and something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. Loretta's first reaction, even then, was to minimize. She suggested this Anton person could be running some kind of scam, that I should be careful, that this all sounded too convenient. I understood later that this was less about protecting me and more about protecting herself from having to fully reckon with what her daughter had done, because if the ring truly was worth what I said it was worth, then there was no framing left in which this could be dismissed as a harmless little mistake. I told them plainly that regardless of the ring's ultimate value, what had happened was still theft. Vivienne had gone into my locked case, taken something that did not belong to her, and sold it without asking, and the fact that she had misjudged its worth did not change the fact that she had no right to touch it in the first place. I told them I had already spoken with a lawyer about my options, and that those options included filing a police report for theft, since what had occurred met the legal definition regardless of family relationship. The room went very still at the word police. I watched Vivienne's face lose its color, watched Loretta's mouth open and then close without finding words, and I watched Desmond, my husband, sit forward in his chair and finally, for the first time in this entire ordeal, speak with real clarity. He told his mother and his sister that he loved them both, that they were his family and always would be, but that what Vivienne had done was wrong, plainly and simply wrong, and that he was done maki. NG excuses for behavior that hurt the person he had promised to spend his life with. He said he understood Vivienne had been struggling financially, and that he wanted to help her find a real path forward, but that this could not happen at my expense, and it could not happen again. He told his mother, gently but firmly, that her instinct to protect Vivienne from consequences had, over the years, taught Vivienne that consequences were things other people faced, and that this pattern had to end here, in this room, tonight. I will admit I had not expected Desmond to be quite that direct, quite that unwavering, and something in my chest loosened slightly. Some knot of fear I had not even fully acknowledged. The fear that when it came down to it, he would choose the comfort of his family's old patterns over standing beside me. Vivienne cried that night, real tears, not the manipulative kind she had sometimes used in the past to end uncomfortable conversations, but the kind that comes when someone finally sees themselves clearly and does not like what they see. She admitted, for the first time without hedging, that she had known on some level the ring looked finer than typical costume jewelry, that she had simply chosen not to look too closely because she needed the money and did not want to feel guilty about taking it. She admitted that she had developed a habit, over years of financial instability, of viewing other people's belongings as somehow fair game. A habit she had never really examined because no one in her life had ever forced her to. I did not forgive her that night. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this do a disservice when they pretend forgiveness arrives instantly, wrapped in a neat bow, the moment someone cries and says sorry. I told Vivienne that I appreciated her honesty, but that trust was not something that could be rebuilt with a single conversation, especially not one that only happened because she had been caught and the stakes had turned out to be enormous. I told her that real change would have to be shown over time, through actions, not promised in a moment of panic. We did, together as a family, work out a path forward, and I think the specifics of that path matter, because they show what accountability actually looks like when it is done right, rather than performed for show. First, regarding the police report. I ultimately decided, after much thought and several long conversations with Desmond, and with my own conscience, not to pursue formal criminal charges against Vivienne, though I made it clear to her, in front of the family, that I was choosing this path deliberately, as an act of grace she had not yet earned, but that I hoped she would grow into deserving. I told her plainly that this decision was reversible if she ever treated my trust, or the boundaries we were about to set, with the same carelessness again. Anton's firm, once the ring's provenance was formally confirmed, worked with me directly on the return and compensation process, which meant the theft, in a strange twist, had actually surfaced enormous value rather than causing pure loss. But I made sure Vivienne understood that this outcome was luck, not vindication, and that the moral weight of what she had done did not shrink just because it happened to end well financially for me. Second, restitution. Vivienne insisted, without me even asking, on paying back the $500 from the original sale, and she set up a monthly payment plan to do so from her own income, refusing Loretta's offer to simply cover it for her. It was a small amount in the context of everything else, but I understood, and told her I understood, that the significance was not the dollar figure, but the fact that she was choosing to make it right through her own effort rather than having the discomfort smoothed away by someone else, the way things had always been smoothed away for her before. Third, and this took longer to arrange, Vivienne agreed to attend financial counseling, not because I demanded it as a punishment, but because Desmond sat with her one evening and asked her, honestly, whether she wanted to keep living the way she had been living, cycling from crisis to crisis, making decisions under financial pressure that she later regretted. She admitted she did not want that life anymore, that she was tired of feeling like she was always one bad month away from disaster, and that some part of her had known for a long time that she needed real help managing money, and, underneath that, managing the anxiety that drove so many of her impulsive decisions. Fourth, Loretta had her own reckoning to do, separate from Vivienne's. I told her, in a private conversation a few weeks after that first family meeting, that her habit of shielding Vivienne from consequences had not actually protected her daughter, it had crippled her, and that every time Loretta smoothed over a mess Vivienne made, she was teaching her daughter that other people's boundaries and belongings mattered less than Vivienne's comfort. I told her this was not an accusation meant to wound her, but an observation I needed her to sit with, because I could not continue building a relationship with a mother-in-law who instinctively defended wrongdoing the moment it touched her daughter. Loretta, to her credit, did not argue with me that day. She went quiet for a long time, and then she said something I did not expect, that she recognized the pattern because it was the same one her own mother had used with her older brother decades earlier, and that she had promised herself she would never repeat it, and had somehow done exactly that anyway, without realizing. That admission mattered to me more than any apology could have, because it showed self-awareness rather than mere damage control. While all of this family repair work was happening slowly and imperfectly in the background, the process with Anton's firm moved forward in Geneva. It took nearly 4 months for the full authentication to complete, months during which I exchanged dozens of emails, and eventually several video calls with Anton, who turned out to be a warm, careful man in his 60s with a genuine passion for the stories objects carry, not just their monetary value. The final report confirmed everything he had suspected from the first photographs. The ring's maker's mark matched a court jeweler who had operated in the region during the exact years my grandmother would have been young, and the specific setting style matched a small handful of pieces documented in old family photographs belonging to a royal household that had been displaced during the political upheavals of the mid-20th century. Most remarkably, a handwritten household inventory, preserved for decades in a private family archive, listed a ring gifted to a young companion on the night of the family's hurried departure, described in French as en remerciement de sa fidélité, in gratitude for her loyalty. That companion's first name, recorded in the household staff ledger from that period, was Ilinka. I cried when Anton read me that name over a video call, his own voice thick with emotion by the end of the sentence, because it meant my grandmother's story, the story my father used to gently tease as too dramatic to be true, was not embellishment at all. It was history, preserved in a language she had left behind, waiting decades to be confirmed by a stranger on the other side of the world who happened to specialize in exactly this kind of quiet, scattered truth. The royal family, once contacted through the appropriate discreet channels, expressed deep gratitude for the ring's recovery and its confirmed history. And rather than simply reclaiming it outright, they made an extraordinary gesture. Understanding the emotional weight the ring carried for my own family, they offered to purchase it from me at its full authenticated value, allowing it to formally rejoin their historical collection, while also commissioning, at their own expense, an exact replica to be crafted for me to keep, using photographs and detailed measurements taken before the original left my possession, so that the physical connection to my grandmother's story would not be severed from my family entirely. I said yes to that arrangement almost without hesitation, because it honored both truths at once, the ring's rightful historical home and my grandmother's personal legacy. The financial outcome of all this was significant, more money than Desmond and I had ever expected to hold at once in our lives, but I want to be clear that the money is not the part of this story I think about most, even now. What I think about is the version of my family that existed on that first terrible night when I discovered the empty velvet box, and the version that exists now, over a year later, and how different those two families are. Vivienne completed 8 months of financial counseling, and something in her genuinely shifted during that time, not overnight, not in some tidy montage, but slowly, the way real change usually happens. She got a steady job in logistics coordination that she has now held for over a year, longer than any job she held in the previous decade, and she moved into her own apartment, modest but entirely her own, furnished slowly and deliberately rather than impulsively. She finished paying back the $500 6 months after she started, and on the day of that final payment, she came to my house unannounced, sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where this whole nightmare had first unfolded on my laptop screen, and told me she wanted to say something out loud that she had been thinking for a long time. She told me she understood now, in a way she had not let herself understand before, that her habit of taking things without asking, of assuming other people's belongings were somehow available to her if she needed them badly enough, had never actually been about the objects themselves. It had been about a lifetime of feeling like she was always behind everyone else, always scrambling, always entitled to a shortcut, because life had not handed her the same stability it seemed to hand other people. She said therapy, alongside the financial counseling, had helped her see that this belief, however understandable its roots, did not excuse the harm it caused, and that she was genuinely sorry, not because she got caught, but because she had finally let herself imagine what it must have felt like for me to lose something that carried my grandmother's voice inside it. I believed her, not because the words were perfect, but because the months of consistent, unglamorous effort behind them had earned my belief. Loretta's change was quieter but no less real. She started, in small ways, catching herself mid-sentence when old defensive habits rose up, correcting course out loud rather than plowing ahead the way she used to. She apologized to me directly, without qualifiers, for the years of subtle undermining she had done in defense of Vivienne, and she began, slowly, treating my boundaries as legitimate rather than as obstacles to be managed around. Our relationship now is not effusive. We are not the kind of mother and daughter-in-law who talk on the phone every day, but it is honest, and honest has turned out to be enough. Desmond and I, if anything, came out of this closer than we went in. There is a particular kind of trust that gets built when you watch your partner choose you, clearly and without hesitation, in a moment when choosing you costs him something with his own family. I had wondered, quietly, for years, whether Desmond would ever be capable of that kind of clarity where his mother and sister were concerned. Watching him find it, and keep finding it, month after month, as the family slowly rebuilt itself around a healthier set of boundaries, gave me a version of my marriage I did not know I was missing. The replica arrived just over a year after that first terrible discovery, delivered in a small wooden box lined with the same deep blue velvet as the original, accompanied by a handwritten letter from Anton describing, in careful detail, the process his craftsmen had used to recreate every visible detail of the original piece, down to the faint worn patch on the inside of the band where my grandmother's finger had rested against it every day for over 60 years. I wear that replica now, on the same thin gold chain I used to wear the original on, and when I hold it, I still think of Ilinka, of a young woman pressing a small gift into her palm before a hurried departure into an uncertain future, trusting that some fragment of a life she was leaving behind might survive, carried quietly by someone loyal enough to keep it safe. In a strange way, the ring did exactly what she needed it to do. It survived. It carried her story forward, farther than she ever could have imagined, all the way to a jeweler's workbench in Geneva and back again. And along the way, it forced my family to look honestly at itself and decide, together, what kind of people we actually wanted to be. We held a small family dinner a few weeks after the replica arrived, not a grand celebration, just the 5 of us, Desmond, Loretta, Vivienne, and me, gathered around the same table where everything had unraveled and then slowly been put back together in a stronger shape. Vivienne, near the end of the evening, asked if she could hold the replica just for a moment, and I said yes without hesitation, something that would have been unthinkable to me a year earlier. She held it carefully, turned it over once in the candlelight, and told me she hoped that one day, if she ever had a daughter of her own, she could tell her the whole story, not just the part about the ring's incredible worth, but the part about what it costs to actually make things right, and how much better it feels to earn trust back slowly than to have never lost it and never had to learn. I think about that conversation often. I think about how easy it would have been for this story to end differently, with lawyers and police reports and a family permanently fractured, everyone convinced they had been the one who was wronged. Instead, we chose the harder, slower path, and it gave us something a courtroom never could have, a family that had actually looked at its own worst instincts and decided together to grow past them. My grandmother used to say that the things worth keeping are rarely the things that are easiest to hold on to. I understand that sentence differently now than I did when she first said it to me as a teenager, half listening, more interested in getting back to my friends than absorbing an old woman's wisdom. She was not just talking about a ring. She was talking about family, about trust, about the quiet, unglamorous work of choosing, again and again, to hold onto the people who matter, even when they have given you every reason to let go. We did not let go. We held on and we rebuilt something better than what we started with. And if you ask me now whether I would trade the money, the royal provenance, the strange, incredible story of it all, for the family I have on the other side of it, I would tell you, without hesitation, that I would give the money back tomorrow and keep everything else exactly as it is.